never talk about subscriptions without having that model, having developed it and going to leadership. If you don't, they'll just throw you out of the room.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle. Now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
Man, it's the same as Dunkin' Donuts. Costs 15 times the price.
Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the synergistic relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving, and today our guest is Ron Giuntini. Here are 3 things you want to know about Ron before we start. He's a principal in a company called Giuntini Company. I wonder where they got the name, and has been there since 1990. Wow. In 2016, he founded another company called G35 Software, a subscription company. Wonder why we're talking to him today. And he's going to teach me and possibly you about a business called Aftermarket Solutions while we discuss subscriptions. Welcome, Ron.
Hey, thanks a lot, Mark.
Hey, this is going to be fun. When you first said aftermarket to me, I was thinking car parts. How far off was I?
Big time. Aftermarket, again, I specialize in the B2B area. Most people think of aftermarket for what's called light vehicles, which is the largest aftermarket sector there is. But the B2B aftermarket for commercial machines is huge. There's approximately $10 trillion worth of commercial machines in the United States, and all of them have to be maintained and upgraded during their useful life. So that's what's called the aftermarket, the maintenance and the modifications, upgrades of these machines during their useful life. That runs around, there's about $250 billion of spend per year for these machines in the United States, and they make up about 30% of the world's market. So big picture, talking about maybe $600 billion worth of spend per year for about $25 trillion worth of
wow.
commercial machines. It's huge. I mean, from airplanes, a $200 million 767 to a Navistar vocational Class 8 truck to a server farm. So it's pretty massive.
Some of this sounds like it makes sense. Those examples were fabulous, by the way. I was thinking about automobiles, of course, when we got the aftermarket there. And the fact that there are millions and millions of automobiles means that we've built this industry around how do we get spare parts out. And we have spare parts stores and all of that. And as soon as we jump into industrial, in my mind, I wasn't thinking we had these massive volumes, as in, there's a lot of airplanes out. But I was thinking more one-off factory equipment. Is there a difference between, say, airplanes and factory equipment, just in the number, the volume of the type?
It's a type. Again, commercial airliners, limited. I think there's 10,000 in the States. And then you have thousands of different specialized machine manufacturers, from packaging of fish products to making screws for the fastener distribution business. I mean, it's massive, and each one of those, to be a player in the original equipment manufacturing area, you must have an aftermarket strategy, and it's all over the place. Some OEMs go directly to the end users. Others go through distribution channels, like John Deere with their tractors, combines. They have a massive distribution network, as well as Caterpillar, for example.
Nice. And so I'm going to tie this back to automobiles only because it's the only one I really know, if that's okay.
It's okay. Just for your own information, there's 240 million light vehicles in the United States that are registered.
Oh, so it probably behaves a lot like the automobile marketplace.
So 240 million light vehicles is what you call automobiles, which are SUVs and cars. So that's a huge market, but that's not what I get involved with. That's a B2C market.
Absolutely. But when I think about what goes on in that market, because I'm trying to pull the analogy here, when I think about what goes on in that market, the parts manufacturers sell directly to the manufacturer of the automobiles. They sell to advanced auto parts.
Right.
Sell to the service organizations, whether it's a brand name, so it's the Lexus service organization, or it's a third-party service organization. And I'm assuming that you have to go through those types of channels as well. Is that true or not?
On the B2B side, there's combinations. There's, as you mentioned, there's the captive distributors of the OEMs, like your Lexus dealer. And then there's independent organizations. And then, which is changing the entire business model, is the whole subscription model or product as a service, where the channels get a little strange as they evolve.
Okay, now you're starting to get me excited. Just pontificate for a second. When you say product as a service, the one that comes to my mind is GE jet engines. But what else are you thinking?
Well, there's a misconception about GE engines. There's two parts to product as service. There's an operating lease, and then there's a service contract to assure it's the management of the life cycle of the engine. So when people talk about GE, it's really what they call power by the hour, which is Rolls-Royce actually created that term, but it's a long-term service contract that assures the availability of those engines and their minimum downtime over a period of time, usually 7 to 15 years. So all the airliner engine manufacturers have had that since probably mid-70s. There's been variations of it. The majority of all engines that are hung on airliners today have a service contract. Some of them are availability driven. You just pay an X amount of money to have 99.8% uptime or availability, and others are just period based. So, but every industry is moving. There's robots. The big driver for the new model subscription or products as a service is actually the robotics marketplace. That's evolving very rapidly with huge amounts of IP embedded in the machines, and high-tech robotic manufacturers are no longer selling their machines. They're actually providing them as a service and charging per hour of use or some kind of output, tons carried or whatever moved within a warehouse. So the world is changing dramatically. Well, it's changing, I would call it a little slower, because of the business model is very, very scary for leadership of most original equipment manufacturers.
Although I have a guess, and I'll share it with you in a second, why do you think robotics is leading in this subscription pricing model?
Well, two big major drivers. First of all, the value of those machines is basically firmware, embedded software, that highly, highly proprietary IP. And that's the major driver for these machines. So they're not going to sell that. First of all, it'd be nuts to cause their brand to be damaged by the users actually trying to change some of the software. So they're protecting it. If you look at the whole cost structure of a robot, only 20% is actual material, 20, 30%. The rest of it is IP, R&D, and IP. So it's sort of silly. And the upgrades are constant on these software upgrades, either done remotely or done on premise. So, and these things will constantly evolve and they'll be modified, some hardware, but mostly software. So most of these guys are going, oh, why am I selling this? And the customers are going, I don't have anyone to deal with some of this technology. So they bundle it, and you're starting to see that now in factories. You're starting to see that it was funny, I saw one on people developed a robot that actually patrols the streets of New York City. And
nice.
the city pays per hour of use of these things versus a security guard.
But before you share the second one with me, Ron, I want to make sure I understand the first one. So I think what you're saying is, because there is a huge service component that is very technical, meaning we need to do regular upgrades, then that's what may be leading people to say, let's go subscription, although they could sell that service as a service.
They could sell it separately, the hardware and the service.
Yes.
But it's all about protecting your brand and your IP. That's very, very important. If you look at most commercial machines, especially in the high-tech area, most of it is IP. There's a tremendous amount of IP in regards to R&D that was employed in that product. So it makes a lot of sense. I've been talking about this for 20 years. I've been thrown out of board meetings actually on this. My wife keeps on asking me, "You sure you're in the right business?" No, but it's pretty revolutionary. But what's interesting is, you know who had this model, this subscription model originally? You'll never believe this. It freaks out people. But Howard Hughes' father created the drill bit to drill through stone to look for oil. He had a patent, and he never sold those drill bits. They're huge drill bits. He only rented them and provided them in effect as a subscription. And when his parents died, all he did was print money. At 25, his parents had both died. And that was actually the foundation of his fortune, a subscription model for drill bits.
Wow. Okay, so first we're going to do a fact check on that. And second, I'm adding that to my subscription pricing class. It's such a great story.
It is funny. There's another story. You see, people, this is all Yogi Berra, deja vu all over again. There was the other thing that everyone listening to this podcast should look at was a famous U.S. Shoe Machinery Company antitrust suit. U.S. Shoe Machinery had the perfect subscription product as a service model. What they did was they made machines that fabricated shoes. The United States was the largest shoe manufacturer in the world, mostly in New England. And they had 95% market share. They never sold their machines. What they did was they charged the shoe manufacturers per shoe manufactured. They gave them the consumables, they installed the machines, they did all the maintenance, and they charged per shoe. The competitors, this is 1950 or so, their model had been around for a couple of decades. Their competitors said, "You're antitrust, you're hurting us because you have a monopoly." At that time, the Supreme Court protected competitors, not the consumers. The consumers were really happy. And the Supreme Court, it's a major case in all law schools. They basically broke up U.S. Shoe Machinery or Machine Company, and the shoe industry collapsed after that over 2 decades. But now the Supreme Court says, as long as the consumer is not hurt, they really don't give anything about the competitors. As long as the consumer's okay, there's no antitrust involved.
Right.
So it's very interesting.
Did you have a second reason why you thought robotics is leading in the product as a service here?
Yeah, well, again, the technology. So you got the protecting the brand. Those things are, very complex, and people can do silly things with them, and then they blame the manufacturer for it. So it's more protection of IP and getting the IP, but also the OEM getting constant feedback. That's one way. If you're managing the maintenance of these machines and you have people feet on the ground all the time, you're getting instant feedback, which also feeds into your R&D effort and your development effort. That's another.
Yeah. Okay. So I hate disagreeing with my guests, but I'm not a huge fan of the reasons protecting IP and protecting brand, although those are pretty reasonable reasons. I love the answer that said, I want more data and more information about my customers, because then I can improve my product, my service, and I'm going to keep people happier for the long run, and it'll be harder for my competitors to catch me. Let me give you the reason that I really think robotics is leading this. Companies should be using value-based pricing. And value is, how much value is my customer going to get out of having my product, using my product? And as soon as we think of robotics, they can be applied in so many different places and different ways. that each one of those is going to generate a dramatically different amount of value. And these companies should be focused on, how do I capture more of the value for that application as opposed to for my IP and my hardware? What do you think of that?
No, I agree 100%. I mean, the value proposition, it's just like the example I gave you about the robots being leased to the city of New York on an hourly basis, all right? The fee that they're charging, these security guards were being paid $15 an hour or whatever, and they're charging $11 an hour for these robots to patrol these streets, all right? Even though it might cost them $1.25, it's irrelevant.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Absolutely.
So I agree with you. I'm just looking at the other aspects of their business strategy.
I think the reasons were good. I'm just not sure that I would have put those on the top of my list for why they go subscription first.
Okay.
But that's okay. Hey, Tell me what G35 does.
Well, we're a software startup that is focused on providing original equipment manufacturers with application software that enables them to configure and price quotes for aftermarket, B2B aftermarket service contracts. That's what there's nothing out there that does that. It's very complex, a lot of risk mitigation, a lot of probability analysis. There's AI. I mean, it's complex when you're looking at a 3 to 5 year contract that provides maintenance and upgrades for multiple machines at possibly multiple sites. And our software, I've developed that. I'm working with an organization in the UK where we're putting together the application software. There's a lot of code involved. I've been at it for a while. We got modules done. It's been a little slow going, but if it was easy, everyone else would be doing it.
Exactly. So I think what I just heard you say, and please correct me here if this is not accurate, I think what I heard you say was, if I'm going to go into a product as a service type business, then I've got to be able to estimate my costs in order to make sure I'm covering my costs as I price it. And then I'm also going to want to have a configured price quote type system for this B2B market.
That's correct. And there's the value proposition. So you got to know what your costs are, but the costs are all time phased. So, and there's probability involved. For example, you have to do forecasting on reliability. So you have to forecast what the failure rate will be, what the cost of each failure event will be. Okay. Then you have a bunch of indirect costs. That's a direct cost. Then you have an indirect cost, and you roll them up. And then you have to look at the value proposition. For example, there's what's called swaps. And some people may be familiar with that. When you have a computer and you have a hard drive fails, the HP, whatever, will send you a unit, and you just swap it and you just put it in. Yep. Now, swaps have the value proposition for a swap is nothing to do with its cost, because the customer says, okay, this item costs $100. You give me a swap for $70. That sounds like a great deal. It might be refurbished or whatever. They really don't care. They just want to put it in there. But the unit may only cost $20 to repair for the OEM. So there's a lot of variables. I mean, there's all kind of pricing. This gets really complex in regards to cost. Some items are cost plus, some items are value proposition. And you're dealing with the typical OEM in a service contract will have thousands of parts.
Yeah. Okay. I have to say two things here, Ron. Sorry. Okay. One, we're not allowed to say the words cost plus in a positive way on this podcast.
There are some items that, given the efficiency, it makes sense on the low value cost plus.
If you could imagine a retailer who has 100,000 SKUs, there's no way they could do value-based pricing on every SKU.
That's exactly right.
So I'm with you, but tongue in cheek, I avoid that word a lot.
I know. I don't. I'm not wild about it, but when you're dealing with an OEM, actually has many OEMs have hundreds of thousands of part numbers, and they, cost plus, and I've even, you talk about pricing on some of those long tail SKUs that don't have much value, I just make them $1 a piece. And it doesn't matter if they cost me $3 or $5. It doesn't matter. They're long tail on a weighted average. They have virtually no impact,
Right. Right. The other point that I really wanted to make is the conversation that Ron and I just had, a lot of it was around estimating cost. And just because we're estimating cost, it doesn't mean we're doing cost plus pricing. In every deal that we do, if I'm a manufacturer and I'm going to sell something, I want to make sure I'm covering my costs. And so there's a number that I would call willingness to accept. Just like a customer has a willingness to pay that we're trying to figure out, we need to understand our willingness to accept, which is the floor that we would ever take a deal. How do we do that? Well, we do that by understanding what our costs are, what the required margin would be before we would ever say yes to a deal. And then we try to get some price above that number. Costs are important for us to understand. We just don't use them to set the price. Is that fair, Ron?
That's exactly right. Cost estimation is an art form in itself. And what always confuses me is that a lot of pricing people don't really look under the commode in regards to what makes up that cost.
I tell you what, that doesn't bug me at all. What I would love to see pricing people do is completely ignore cost, come up with a price, hand it to the finance people and say, can we sell it for this?
Yeah, right.
And let finance decide if it's profitable or not.
Yeah, I agree. The question is, who does that? Is it the product manager who wants to? It's very complex. But what I'm always shocked by is that in the OEM field, cost is a managerial cost accounting. And that, by definition, is a forecasted cost. And that has all kind of ramifications in regards to the acceptable price that finance will accept. If the cost is screwed up, which many times it is, that has huge dynamics involved.
Oh, without a doubt. Costing is a pain to do. It is inaccurate, and yet, I don't want to sell something below my cost, so we've got to have some guardrail in there.
Yeah, I agree. I spend a lot of time on managerial cost accounting versus financial accounting versus tax accounting. They're all different, and a lot of people don't follow the differences.
I've been trying to create a new one. I call it price accounting. What are the numbers you need to know to do pricing?
Yeah, well, it does. It's complicated, and they really don't teach pricing per se. In a lot of in school, so you get an MBA, basic pricing, and a lot of it has to do with B2C. B2C world pricing is almost an emotional event. B2B people are looking at things completely different in many cases.
Yeah, it's actually funny because in B2C, it's both really emotional and it's really non-emotional. So it's emotional in that your consumers are having emotional responses to your prices, but it's non-emotional in that the product people have millions of data points and they're testing price elasticities and cross elasticities, and so they've completely removed themselves from the customer's decision. Yeah,
and again, like we've talked in the past, B2B world, the data set population is a fraction of the B2C world.
Yeah,
so that has all different dynamics.
And in this world of B2B, we actually have to understand the way buyers make decisions, and we have to think about that. We can't just rely on the data, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
So, hey, Ron, this has just been fabulous. I've learned a ton, and I have loved chatting with you. As we wrap this up, what's one piece of subscription pricing advice that you would give our listeners that you think might have a big impact on their business?
Well, you must model it financially to present to your leadership. If you're interested in moving towards that, you have to have the backup of the CFO, because the risks, especially more than 1 year, there are subscription services that are 1 year, but those that go out for a couple of years, you must model it. That's my recommendation.
I'm completely with you. Life was so much easier when we would just take a big check and ship a product and then have to walk away, or get to walk away, I should say. And and now it's not quite as easy as we do the subscription business.
It is. That's absolutely right. So that's probably the best. That means that you never talk about subscriptions without having that model, having developed it and going to leadership. If you don't, they'll just throw you out of the room and ask you, when you're adult, come back. Okay.
And speaking of the model, one more topic that I haven't talked about on the podcast yet at all, and I'm going to have to bring up and dig into one day, but cash flow is a huge challenge when we go to subscriptions, and you need your finance people to help you with that.
Yeah, that's why you first have to convince your leadership, but then leadership has to convince their investors, because that causes some issues on the balance sheet. You might have, you obviously, when you start a subscription service, you hemorrhage cash flow wise, because you have a bunch of upfront expenses that you don't have corresponding cash to support. Then you have, revenue recognition issues. That's another ugly aspect. And then you have, if you have an operating lease, then you have to decouple it, what's called an embedded lease, from a subscription service. That gets ugly. But besides that, it's a very simple transition.
Hey, Ron, thank you so much for your time today. If anyone wants to contact you, how can they do that?
You can contact me at ron@G35software.com. That's my email address. And I can follow up from there.
And so for the rest of you, my team and I, we've been furiously creating a new course called B2B Subscription Pricing. We're going to be looking for a couple of beta tests, and of course we'll be looking for real paying customers as well. At first, this is only going to be available for live delivery at your facility. If you're interested, would you please drop me a note? I'll give you the email address in just a second. Episode 14 is in the bag. Ron was fabulous, and I learned a ton. I hope you did as well. If you got value out of this podcast, would you please help us out? Subscribe, leave a review, tell a friend. Every little bit helps, and we are extremely appreciative. Please send any compliments, suggestions, or questions directly to me, mark@impactpricing.com. And don't forget to listen next week for another episode of Impact Pricing.